Hello there, and thanks for joining us on the program People, Politics and Power. I am Imonia Marere. We return yet again to the mounting tension in Niger Republic. It's a developing story which began on July 26 when the military in that country, led by General Abdurrahmane Chiani, ousted the democratically elected President Mohamed Bazoum and detained him, some members of his family, and some government officials. It went ahead to name a 21-member cabinet headed by a civilian prime minister and has in the last 2 days announced a 3-year transition program that will run until 2026. The military junta is also insisting on putting ousted President Bazoum on trial for what it calls treason, which is punishable by death. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, has promptly rejected the 3-year transition plan. The military regime has vowed to defend itself if ECOWAS, which slammed economic and other forms of sanctions on that country in the wake of the coup, carries out its threat to use force to restore democratic rule in Niger. The regime appears emboldened by the support it is getting from fellow military regimes in neighboring Mali and Burkina Faso, which have already deployed fighter jets to Niger, and the Russian-backed Wagner mercenary group. The flurry of diplomatic activities to de-escalate the situation and reach a peaceful resolution have been to no avail so far. Several official and unofficial delegations have visited Niamey to negotiate a resolution. The latest was an ECOWAS delegation led by Nigeria's former head of state, General Abdulsalami Abubakar, which met with the military regime last Saturday in Niamey. It joined forces with the United Nations Special Representative for West Africa and the Sahel, Leonard Santos Simao, in what appeared to be a last-ditch effort to stave off a possible military confrontation. It was shortly after the visit that the regime announced its 3-year transition plan. Now, was this part of the deal with the ECOWAS delegation, or is it in defiance of the ECOWAS position for it to stand down immediately? For the ECOWAS, is this a case of fait accompli? Earlier last Friday, Chiefs of Defense Staff of 11 of the 15 member states of the ECOWAS met in Accra, the Ghanaian capital, and agreed to commit troops to a military deployment for the restoration of constitutional order in Niger, whenever the order is given. The question is, what happens now? The military option, if diplomacy fails, has however received a lot of flack from various groups both within and outside the ECOWAS bloc. One of such groups is the US-based Africa Policy and Strategic Development Institute, which on August 7 wrote an open letter to ECOWAS opposing its proposed military action. The group is concerned that it might have what it calls unintended consequences for the people of Niger and the entire West African sub-region. So on the program today, we shall examine the latest developments in the Niger-ECOWAS face-off. Who blinks first? What can ECOWAS do to halt the creeping reversal of democracy in the sub-region by military adventurers? These are the issues we'll be looking at. So, quickly, let us meet our guest analyst. Right here in the studio, we have Professor Ubong Umor. Professor Umor is an associate professor of military history at the University of Uyo. Thank you so much for joining us, Prof. And joining us from the United States of America is Professor Bright Aregiegbe, Rex. He's the president, Africa Policy and Strategic Development Institute in Northridge, California. He's joining us virtually from the United States. Prof, thank you so much for finding time to join us.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here with you.
Right. Let me begin with you. What will be your response to the latest developments in Niger? At the time you wrote, your institute wrote to the ECOWAS leaders asking for more dialogue and more diplomatic initiative to resolve the crisis. The regime in Niamey had not gone to the extent it went in the last 48 hours.
Well, I think that diplomacy cannot be expired when dealing with family members. Yeah, ECOWAS and Niger Republic, they are family because Niger Republic is part of ECOWAS. I do not think that I don't know if I want to call it threat that military action will be taken. I don't think that ECOWAS actually would turn guns to Niger, which is itself. Uh, that they have not restored the constitutional order in Niger does not necessarily mean that there will never be constitutional order. You just talk about 3 years that they gave. From experience, both at home and abroad, anywhere else in the world, when there is a coup d'etat, it's absolutely uh, difficult. If the restoration is not done immediately to term the coup failed, it becomes extremely difficult to turn back and say, go and put the other people there with weight of guns. So I think diplomacy should continue. I think at this point in time, the crack that necessitates the coup should be resolved and give the military junta some time to fix that crack and return to constitutional order.
Do you see that really happening? Do you see these military boys in Niger right now restoring constitutional order, even within the 3 years that they have given as a transition period? Because it always starts like that. Look at Guinea, look at Mali, look at Burkina Faso. It doesn't appear that that the military respects its own plans and its own programs.
Yes, it is not an hasty thing. The fact is that there is, or there was, a crack in the system. I've said that quite a few times. There is unimportant action that we are taking at the time important action should have been taken. And to say whether they will return to uh, constitutional order in in uh, in 3 years will depend upon when the new constitution is put in place. Because if there were check and balances in the previous constitution, they wouldn't have taken over the government and obliterate that constitution. They can't return back to that same constitution. Something has to be done. And the new constitution must be the people's constitution, not the military's constitution. The military has no responsibility to formulate or create or write a paper called constitution. So therefore, you will have to give them time. I understand we are dealing with some of these countries to see that they return back to civilian rule, but the civilian rule should be that which will benefit the people of Niger in this time. And you just talk about Mali. Yes, I think I've gone through their document, the constitution, I've seen it, and I do think that they are on a great track. As long as they can establish peace and tranquility in that state or in any state that the military take over, the better for the people. It's not a fire on their butt from external forces to tell them do this and do that. Remember, this is a sovereign nation. You cannot have a sovereign nation be pushed left, right, and center. And that is what constitutes, or rather, that's what provoked the military to do what they are doing, according to the report that we have read.
Okay, let me bring in Professor Umar, who is right here in the studio. Professor Umar, first, let me ask you your opinion or your views on the very latest developments. The fact now that it appears that the military junta in Niamey is defying the ECOWAS and has set a 3-year agenda for itself, a transition plan, as it were.
Uh, the outlook of what you have in Niger is a military intervention in a democratic setting. And the response from the ECOWAS members, 11-member country, is also at this point, after attempt at diplomatic reconciliation, moderation, and moistening, is a response that has to also do with a military intervention into a military intervention in a democratic setting. So ECOWAS, leaning upon experience, like you mentioned, is obvious in Mali, Burkina Faso. Let's take the Burkina Faso example. Even after all the sanctions and all the diplomatic interventions, it appears that military power stands out obviously to be the most respectable element of national power that would actually lead and guide foreign policy. So at this point, it's a response to failed diplomatic efforts, efforts that have actually picked up the best kind of solution. And essentially, to actualize foreign policy, you have the non-violent means, the non-violent instrument and the violent instrument. And the non-violent instrument, which is sometimes mostly called a peaceful instrument, one of which is diplomacy, the management of international relations by negotiation or the use of tact, intelligence, and negotiation in the management of state affairs, has been carefully, appropriately deployed, utilized. And in the non-success of that, I wouldn't call it failure yet, there's an extent to which the military power can be used. First of all, military power without military force first, and that has been displayed and shown in the activation of the force. And I think from the movement of that, we now have the engagement of military force after military power has been engaged, so has been shown off. So at this point, ECOWAS, as a sub-regional organization, using the ECOMOG standing force, stands justified to carry out that engagement. I've heard of the constitutional thesis as argued by Prof. And essentially, for Africa, maybe let me use Niger and even run about the Nigerian example too. We have some of the best constitutions. Really, it's not about the constitution. It's not about writing a new constitution. It's about the rule of law and respect to that for that constitution. And that is the basic problem. And you don't need 3 years to write a constitution. You don't need 3 years to put things in order. And what we are seeing is actually what is mostly embraced with the immediate or first line intervention of the military in issues like this. It comes with so much of excitement. It comes with so much of anticipation. But in days or months or years to come, you would have a whole rollback upon that, and then those timelines would become behaviorally reversed, like it appears to be the nature of man from the domestic, from the individual level of analysis.
The ECOWAS has outrightly rejected the 3-year transition plan by the Chiani-led regime in Niamey. As a military scholar of military history, you should know much better. For instance, that, and I'd like to ask this question: is it possible? Because one of the immediate demands of the ECOWAS is that there should be an immediate reinstatement of President Bazoum to power. Is that possible? Is that feasible in the circumstance?
Yes, very feasible, very possible, and that is where military power comes to play and the actual use and exercise of military force. It is possible. It is forthright. It's it can be actualized. And given the appropriate strategy and the implementation of that strategy upon tactics, I think it would take the military. Though we can't talk about the fog and friction of the war in the context of it or the outlook of the reality in the field, but it is a responsibility of the military to back up the realization of ECOWAS policy, to back up the realization of foreign policy in Niger, ECOWAS towards Niger, in consolidating democratic governance and reversing that which is an aberration to that which is the norm in reality.
And at this point, let me go over to Professor Bright, who is still very much with us from the US. Prof, you talked about constitution making, which is one of the things or one of the items that the new regime has put on the table. Now, Professor Moore seems to argue, and many people will agree with him, that it's always an excuse given by the military to say, oh, we are writing a new constitution, and that's why we need such a long period for a transition to democratic rule. What exactly is wrong with the current constitution of Niger? And as an example, what is wrong with the constitutions of other West African states that the military will always want to rewrite? And by the way, the military, when they rewrite or write constitutions, always do so from a military perspective and not from the perspective of the people.
Thank you very much for that question. For my friend here, Professor Moore, and speaking directly to the question you have just asked me, it is not civilian government that constitutes democracy. We need to understand this. Democracy has to do with that constitution. It's a point of reference. All actions, inaction should be followed as written in the Constitution. If anything is in the Constitution that caused it to crack, they have to rewrite that. And for your information, though, I'm sure you know this. Constitution is not written by the military. The military has to engage the indigents. And the Constitution is not written by lawyers. Lawyers practice the Constitution after studying it. So the Constitution has to come from the people. And to put these people together and fix what went wrong, that to enable military to come in and close that loop, and they now sensitize the people, everybody in the country. It's like, let me say this. It's like we are taking Africa as R&D systems, research and development systems. That's R&D. You are trying and error. Try to see if this will work, if that will work. I said earlier that diplomacy cannot deemed to be expired. It has to continue because as we speak, Niger has been suspended from ECOWAS. Okay? Niger has been blocked from acting amicably with its borders, blocked by ECOWAS. Let me ask you a question. When you do that, and then you turn around, you say you are negotiating, I don't know how that works. Let me ask you a question. I'm sorry if I say that. You don't have to answer the question. I will do the answering. Should Niger be negotiating with ECOWAS right now after they have been removed from that body? ECOWAS just basically put itself as an enemy of Niger, but I will attack you if you don't do what I say. That flex of muscles is not good for us. Why do we have so many coups in Africa? Democracy is given birth by that constitution. The constitution is democracy, not the civilian in office. They can run any government and they are civilians. They can be socialists and they are civilians. So we talk about democracy, understanding the language that says democracy has to be known by all of us, whether we are in ECOWAS, in any country we are. You know why? Democracy is a government by the people and also for the people, and it is the people's government. You can, based on what we read, I'm sure you have read that too, that according to the report coming out from Niger, that the president was trying to release terrorists, and the military say no, that it has caused them a great, what I don't know if that is great, it has caused them blood flow in the previous release. That's a crack in the Constitution, for God's sake. Because there has to be a reference. If the president wants to do anything, the cabinet should know. And the cabinet should approve. So if what they had previously says the president's word is final, then you have a problem. Even in the great United States of America that establishes what we call constitution, I mean a democratically constitution, a democracy for that matter, the president's word is not final. So if that action that necessitates the coup was an exposure of the Constitution to such action that the coup has to take place, then it has to be fixed.
All right, Prof. Yes.
Yes.
A follow-up to that is the fact that the advocacy for dialogue is a good one, fine. But if you notice that ECOWAS has been dialoguing, negotiating, consulting with the Malian military junta, the Burkina Faso military junta, the Guinea military junta, in some cases for over 2 years. And there doesn't seem to be any progress being made in any of these directions. I'm sure you are aware that as at yesterday, the UN peacekeeping force that has been helping to stabilize Mali has started moving out of Mali. The same Mali that is deploying fighter jets to Niger in the hope of helping Niger to ward off a possible attack or use of force by the ECOWAS. If it has so much firepower, why is it unable to deal with the terrorist forces that are destabilizing Mali and Burkina Faso, for instance?
I think you went to an area that's broad to discuss. Number one, in Niger, by 1962, U.S. have forces in Niger. As we speak, perhaps not as smooth as it is, EU have forces in Niger, about 100,000 or 1,000 or whatever thousands they have, and France has 1,500 troops. Why is there terrorists? If you say that Mali has forces and there is terrorists, somebody is feeding the fishes in the pond. Somebody is growing the fishes in the pond. The fishes have to keep making egg and making children. Take that feed away, the fishes will be eliminated. Why is it that almost every African country has to go through coup? Why is it that one president will be in office for 15, 20, 30, 40 years? Do we think about all this? ECOWAS, I think ECOWAS is a great body, but I think it is time for ECOWAS to begin to find why are there coups in Africa? Because reacting to an incident of this great magnitude is not a very good thing. And to quickly suspend the group from the organization is not a good thing. Because if I'm your son and you said that you have denounced me as your son and you are ready to fight with me, what do you think I will do? Lay down and die? No, I ain't going to do that. I will find a way to fight you back because it's all about survivor. What Niger is trying to do is survivor. What Mali is trying to do is survivor. I don't know what Guinea, what necessitate Guinea's coup. I don't know. But for Burkina Faso, it's all for survivor. For all Africa countries, it has happened to us, Nigerians. There was a coup in 1966. When did we get out of that coup? How many years later? 1966 to 1979. And within a short period of time, there was a coup again, less than 4 years. And we swim in that coup till 1999. And even in 1999, our construct was not right. That's why we're having problems. Is that what you want for Niger? Is that what you want for Mali? Is that what you want for Burkina Faso? We have to learn from our experiences and our mistakes.
Okay.
What is the root cause of these coups? That's what we must find out. That's what we must stop. Why would we have a former colonizer station military in our environment? Is it that we are not matured? Is it that we cannot protect ourselves? Above all, is it that we do not belong to a body that has the capability to protect its neighbors? So there are a lot of things we are saying. But by the way, if the military goes in there, the image of France, Niger's former colony or colonizer, if military goes there, their image in Africa will be drastically eroded. So let me say one thing that you may want to think about too. An idea that is there as great is difficult to stop.
Are you saying, Prof, that the idea of military rule in Niger is one that has come to stay?
No. What I'm saying is this. Something is wrong with the paper that we are writing and calling Constitution, and I employ people to fill the positions dictated by the Constitution. The position of the president is dictated by the Constitution.
All right.
And if the president is overthrown, means the Constitution did not properly spell out his duties, and whose duty should balance his duty. The duty of the president must be balanced. How? So if it is not balanced and an action is taken, and based on that action, the military come in, you have to give them time. What exactly do we want to do with civilian government when the civilian government is choking the people that is supposed to be governing? We have not. It's not civilian government. It's how the structure. Is the structure that is that said A must do A's business, B must do this business, Z must do this business, and based on that, you have smooth running of a system. It's not simply being president, civilian president, or military general. It's not always that. That is not what it takes to make it happen. The reason why military tend to succeed sometimes and stay put is that they have they focus on one thing: protect the people, number one, change from what was in the Constitution that was causing hardships. But when you just say big civilian government without proper structure, it doesn't work that way.
All right. So. All right, Prof. Let me bring in Professor Moore. Professor Moore, I know that you have some reactions to the position of Professor Bright. But first, let me ask this question. There are those who think that the possibility of militaries, the frequent intervention or the intervention of militaries in democratic governance in parts of Africa is the fact that the civilians appear to keep the military too close to governance most of the time.
Well, the civilians have to work hand in hand with the military in the context of governance, in the context of military aid to civil authority. Whether you're running through the theory of Samuel Huntington on the horseback, or you're running through the various arguments of root first, the barrel of a gun, to look at the argument for military intervention, the whole position is that the civilians don't work in the context of governance and leave the military aside. And if you look at the military, these start from their training. I will pick up Nigeria, for instance, and at the Nigerian Defense Academy, you run first upon the tactical aspect of it, where you're just trained to know how to shoot at the low level officership, and when you are a lieutenant, and then you run to a captain, and then from a captain to a major, you're being exposed to the operational level of the war. And then when you're moving from the major to the lieutenant colonel to the brigadier general, and to the colonel, and then the brigadier general, you should be exposed to the strategic aspect of it. You know, why you're engaging in war, and there's a whole lot of civil-military relations as it has to do with that. So the military is not such, you just keep somewhere and say no, but at the strategic level, and even at the grand strategic level, you know, which they are exposed to at the National Defense College in Nigeria, for instance, they are being exposed to reasons, the options. And can you get this target without using war? If you can actually get the target without engaging war, then it's better. Or can you bring in the whole gamut of the grand strategy, the diplomatic, the cultural, the technological, the economic, and so on and so forth, to engage in this in order to achieve that? So the military are not just thrown into one corner. They are actually very, very politically conscious, and why things like this happen and why they should happen. But in all of that, they still owe the responsibility of military subordination to a civilian authority. And in that context, despite the closeness, they should be able to understand that the civilian authority gives them the decision, or gives them the reason to act in a particular direction and dimension. And if I would go back to what Bright said, Professor Bright said, it goes on to, so we don't go into a whole lot of thesis and antithesis. Let's try and synthesize our positions and argument. If you run through it from a historical perspective, you would see that the whole idea of this democratic construct, which, because he has moved from the constitutional thesis to the democratic thesis, the whole argument of this democratic construct is born upon Immanuel Kant's 1794 idea of perpetual peace, which it says that it's a tripod of democracy, interdependence, and international organizations. In the sense that if you pick up just one part of the tripod, which is democracy, Immanuel Kant would argue, which was made again further enunciated by Woodrow Wilson in the 1918 Peace of Paris after World War I, to close up World War I. And the whole argument would be about the democratic peace thesis. What's the democratic peace thesis? That democracies hardly go to war against each other. In any case of war, it would either be between a democracy and a non-democracy, or two non-democracies. And if you run upon that, you see that the argument which Francis Fukuyama built upon and worked on considerably in 1991 in his book, The End of History and the Last Man, would put forward that if all nations would become democratic, then there will be no wars. So it was a no-war thesis, that if all nations become democratic, then actually there will be no wars. And you see that from World War I, the whole idea of the United States being involved in the Peace of Paris process would be that nations should be made democratic. All nations should be made democratic, and that was one of the 14 points of the Wilsonian 14 point in World War I, after World War I. You see it again in the first, second, and third waves, and the fourth wave of democracy, as argued by Samuel Huntington. And in that argument, you see that the wave of democracy will pass into Africa. But when we say democracy, it should be understood with so much of relativity, because democracy is not a final point, or it could be a final point for something, but for Africa, it is a process, it's a procedure. So a country could move from a non-democratic experiment to a democratic experiment. That means it could move from an autocracy to a democracy. But sometimes it leaves the autocracy nexus or the autocracy standpoint, but not arrive at the democracy. So it is midway between democracy and autocracy, not a full democracy and not a stable autocracy. And then, you know, our brothers in the political science would call it an anocracy. So it's not a democracy completely because of its features, or it should look like a democracy or looking like a democracy or almost a democracy. And it's not also an autocracy. And you would have such realities, you see military generals transforming into civilian, you'd call it civil, is it democratic rule or civilian rule, but it is a stalemate somewhere. And the whole reality is that a stable democracy or a democracy at the end point, the final point, is more stable than an autocracy, sorry, an anocracy that has not yet reached the point of democracy. Its autocracy too on its own could even be more stable than an anocracy or even some democracies, depending on what is acceptable. But the situation in Niger is that something has been agreed upon, which is the basis of governance and rule, which is the constitution. And I expected loopholes in that constitution to be picked up, and this is the reason. And if there are loopholes in the constitution, I think there are constitutional processes and democratic and civil processes of taking care of that constitution, and not that aspect of intervention. That intervention is even non-constitutional for the constitution you're trying to work on. So it's a situation in Africa where democracy has not been able to get to the full point of its realization in the context of its maturity and expression, where the institutions that carry out the process of democracy, or that are the harbingers of this democracy, are so strong and stable in such that they make for the enjoyment and the satisfaction of the citizenry upon the kind of democracy. Okay. So that should be looked upon, and we should look at it from that angle first of all.
Well, Professor Bright had alluded to the fact that ECOWAS, in suspending Niger from the ECOWAS regional body, actually pushed the regime to some extreme, and that's why they are reacting the way they are reacting. In other words, he's saying, look, if you wanted to dialogue with this military regime in Niger, you ought to have left them in the ECOWAS sub-regional body and begin to negotiate or dialogue with them, rather than push them to the extreme of suspending them, slamming sanctions on them, and by doing that, you may have actually alienated them from the rest of the sub-regional body.
Well, that's an argument that it's interesting, but it can't hold on the ground that the first provocation was a military intervention. And that was a provocation on the ECOWAS as a regional body. So when you look at it from that angle, when you look at it from that aspect, you should be able to understand that it's a response upon the provocation. That's the first provocation being the military intervention, and now the provocation of ECOWAS, or the action by ECOWAS, has also, led to another provocation on the other side. If you look at, if you should run on Professor Bright's thesis, and it's one provocation leading to another, and the understanding is that there are various ways of pulling an erring or a pariah state back, and one of it has to do with the placement of sanctions. And sanctions could range from positive sanctions to negative sanctions. In the context of, if you're talking about positive sanctions and you are looking at issues bordering on reward, or negative sanctions bordering on consequences for actions carried out. And it is obvious that Niger had a hindsight of the consequence of such an action. But there is a whole background effect of this, of which I think we should hurry to talk about it in the context of things bordering on the conspiracy theory. There are many other things at the background pushing upon these things, and that's why I was talking about the placing of feed for the fishes in the water, and trying to pick up on these things. There are a whole lot of Western interest, especially as it has to do with a part of the world that is considered to be the periphery, and the periphery depending or should depend on the core and also feed and sustain the core. So there is so much from the international or the systemic dimension to look at this, to be able to understand that much of these issues bordering on instability, issues bordering on governance, and issues bordering on intervention are not just a state-based something at the state level of analysis or a regional something, a regional issue on the regional level of analysis, but we should be able to look at it from the systemic level of analysis and the global level of analysis.
What do you expect moving forward now? Do you expect ECOWAS, I mean, given the fact that the army chiefs, the military chiefs met in Accra last week and say, look, we are just waiting for orders. If the orders are given, we are ready to contribute troops and move into Niger. Do you expect that to really happen?
At once.
Or do you think that in the final analysis, ECOWAS might just be losing its relevance?
Well, the first issue of losing relevance should be in the reality in Burkina Faso, in Guinea, and Mali. We should look at the losing of relevance there, where the diplomatic intervention has actually been called off to be a bluff. And you're talking about national power, you're talking about issues bordering on respect, and you're talking about issues bordering on the respect for the position of a regional body which was voluntarily signed, agreed upon, issues bordering on personal conviction or state conviction and voluntary compliance. It was generally agreed upon. And you've seen the failure of diplomatic attempts. And upon the failure of diplomatic attempts, the military instrument is waged upon. Yes, it has its own, it has all of the trappings of its of unintended consequences and things we cannot see, which CrossFit will call the fog and fiction of battle or war. But the whole understanding is that at this point, it has been activated, and it should be triggered, you know, at least at most to serve as a deterrence to other, because it's running upon a domino effect. If you look at the range, if you look at how it's moving, or a broken window theory, if I should borrow from the sociologist, is pulling in and pulling through. And if you look at the theories of military intervention, apart from just issues of the military being a modernizing institution, and the barrack bottom thesis, it's also an issue bordering on attraction, that a coup in one country calls for an attraction in a coup in another country. And if you're talking about issues bordering on rule of law, I think the best place, the manifest place to see it is in a democratic setting and not in a military setting upon a military intervention.
Professor Bright, let me bring you in once again. And flowing from what Professor Moore has talked about now, it appears that what is happening in Niger was necessarily not because of bad governance, as the military want to put it, but the fact that they are only copying or emulating what is happening around them, their neighbors, Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea. And that may have been the motivation, and not necessarily because the president was going to release terrorists and all of that, because there are scores and scores of terrorists who are on the loose in Mali and in Burkina Faso, who are wreaking havoc in those countries. So the question then is this the motivation, the fact that the military in Niger was simply trying to borrow a leaf from their brothers in Mali and Burkina Faso?
Thank you for that question. That is just an assumption. That is an assumption. That I kicked the soccer ball or the football simply because the other guy kicked it. That's a game. But let me say this, too, before I even answer your question. From certain rank in the military is politics. The purpose of the military is to protect its nation from any external aggression. The ECOWAS charter that I have read over and over, I did not see where they say they will militarily approach its own part, its own constituent country that is a member of it. So it would be an illegal thing to do. If there was human rights abuse, people are being killed, they can move in there to find a way to settle the two. But that's not the point. there was a coup. The coup did not shed any blood. Why do we want to shed blood now? And for anybody that think ECOWAS can't go back, there is one single action that ECOWAS will take, and ECOWAS will get out of the hook. Easy, very easy. And all this war thing will be over. But they have to take that action.
What is that action,
The
Prof?
action is not what we are here to discuss.
What
we are
is
discussing military regime as compared to civilian regime or civilian government. But you have to remember one thing. The thing is, the purpose of governing a territory. A territory is a country. What is the purpose of governing it? It's for peace and tranquility, for protection, for security. ECOWAS charter states that it will help neighboring their body, their neighbors, economically, peacefully. There is nowhere in the charter that stated military action against any neighbor that does A, B, C, Z. So why are we doing it now? That action itself, if I'm an ECOWAS leader, I will not take it. And if I do, I will find a way to get out of it. Because you cannot react to a particular occurrence with what the people will term hasting action. ECOWAS is reacting to what happened. I understand that. ECOWAS is a great body. I understand that. But what we are saying is that there is something wrong with the structure. Definitely there's something wrong. My opponent, or not opponent, my colleague here, if I may say that, said that a quote history of constitution. But he hasn't said what democracy, sorry. But he didn't say what democracy is. This is our problem in Africa. Understanding precisely what is democracy. What is it? How is it created? Not where it's coming from, not who established it. As a matter of fact, democracy was established by Africans. Africa run democracy for many, many years, but they didn't call it democracy. I come from a part of Africa that has upper house, lower house, the king, and so on. And that's a democracy, perfect democracy. And we run for hundreds of years. How old is this democracy that we have now? So we have to be patient and understand what exactly is democracy. Not just the word, not just the name. Like I said earlier, it is not a civilian government that is called democracy. Because there are so many civilian governments, there's socialism, communism, and many others.
right, Professor Bright? Let me drop in here and ask you this question. You have been talking about structures that are faulty. I know, for instance, that since Nigeria's return to democracy in 1999, we have had to amend the Nigerian constitution several times. And that's because we have always agreed that what was given to us by the military in 1999 was not a perfect document. And so why is the case that not the same case in Niger? Why could they not agitate for a review or amendment of the constitution of Niger rather than resort to the military option?
I said earlier, and I said it twice now, that something is wrong with the system. The system was put together by an assumption. This is what it should be, this is what it is. I think that is how the other people are doing it, without actually understand what is it that we are doing. Now, if the system gives so much power to the president, and there is military that is responsible for security in the country, not within the country, but for external aggression. And I believe that terrorism that is roaming wild and free in West Africa and many other places, even in East Africa, is not within. So that's an external. And who will stop them is the military that you put together for that single purpose, to challenge any external aggression and stop it before it gets into the country. So if for instance, for example, you talk about Nigeria, you know Nigeria, I don't know, I don't think we want to go there, but because we are also working on that, I don't think we want to discuss it here. Nigeria is a country that Africa should look up onto. We have a civilian government in 1979. How did it come about? The due diligence was not done. That is why there was a coup in 1983. Barely 3.5 years, they're not even up to 4 years in the government. We just have one. We say 1999 Constitution as amended.
You have advocated that we should be patient. So we are patient with our democracy here in Nigeria. We are patient with our democracy. We have been learning the ropes. We have been making mistakes and correcting them. We have been amending our constitutions to make the instrument much stronger than it was when it was handed over in 1999. We expect that other West African countries should follow the same line of practice.
I don't think they should follow your line. If I have to speak, I'm in Nigeria, but I don't think they should follow your line. For you to amend anything, it has to be right from the beginning. And say, oh, that article there is not quite right. I have written an article for your constitution, and it was voted and accepted. It's a constitutional amendment because it was not there. But yes, my point here exactly is this. Listen to my point carefully. We are Africans. Coups. There were 8 coups in Nigeria. 8. And up to date, we have not gone to study why there are these coups. There are about 90-something, or 100 and something coups in Africa. When you have West Africa body, I think I will challenge them to study why there are coups and how do we stop them.
Okay, Professor Bright, I'm sorry our time is running out very fast. We must go. But before we do so, Professor Moore, Prof has talked about the non-interference clause in the ECOWAS protocol. Is what is happening right now, is that a violation of that protocol?
It's not a violation. Most of that has been highly moderated, especially on the eve of the Liberian and Sierra Leone conflict that called upon, even before the provisioning or the reality of the R2P, the responsibility to protect.
And there was also the Gambia.
Yes, the Gambia. You see that
2 years back.
Yes, it happens in one African country. It has an effect on many other African countries, and as such, yes, to take care of so many things and to take up the spillover effect, you can see that even the mandate that brought in ECOWAS into Liberia had to be, recalibrated to look at the issue of enforcement when peacekeeping was not actually real upon the ground. So yes, our issues with Niger, not with Nigeria. And we are talking about Niger today. We are not talking about Nigeria, but yes, Nigeria could be a good example for us to pick up on things. But I think it is needful for us to understand that constructing things or defining things in that context, in short, to lean upon what Oscar Wilde said, to define is to limit. So defining concepts like democracy, defining concepts like are things that are very, very limited, and as such, we should look at the operationalization of this on ground, having to do with the rule of law, having to do with obedience to the Constitution, and having to do with providing greater wealth and prosperity for citizens of the country. And I think it's a democratic dispensation, a democracy that has a military subordinate under the civilian regime, to make the civilian authority to make this possible, or all in the aspect of military aid to civilian authority.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you. Professor Ubangumo is an associate professor of military history at the University of Uyo in South Nigeria. And we were also joined all the way from Northridge in California, United States of America, by Professor Bright Aregegbe Arex. He is the President, Africa Policy and Strategic Development Institute. Thank you so much, Prof, for finding time to join us on the program today. I understand this may not be a very convenient time for you out there, but of course, it's in the service of Africa. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
All right, great. And for you, our viewers out there, thank you so much for investing your time with us. We look forward to bringing you a fresh edition of the program, People, Politics, and Power. Bye for now.